was confronted in the street by some insane person who was saying a lot of things aggravate me to fight him. I had like a choice to make. Do I fucking knock this guy out, try to, or do I make a smart choice and I don't need to prove myself to this loser who shoulder bumped me for no reason and is trying to fight me and calling me all these different racial slurs, you know. Hey guys, welcome back to the Way Podcast with your host, Sajid Marwar. Today we have a very special guest on, Dr. Don Rey Juan of ÜNDA Movement.
I'm Don Rey Juan, Brampton kid living in the big city. So as Sajid was saying, I recently, in the last year, opened my own physical therapy studio and movement practice in Leslieville. It's called ÜNDA. That's pretty much it, outside of like a number of other things. I'm a dog dad. Recent dog dad, so yeah.
You've been doing it for over a year now, having your own clinic.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get a little bit of background on how you not just got into this whole practice, but into the practice of like being active in general, like exercise. What is your relationship with that?
Well, I was at U of T for phys ed. Even just getting into school was kind of like a quick, fast decision. While I was still in high school, I had a girlfriend that was older than me, and being just very impressionable and not wanting to feel kind of like left behind. I wanted to make sure I got into a program right away. So she was in kin, and that kind of just nudged me in that direction. And then, you're kind of in it for 4 years, just wanting to kind of see it through.
Yeah.
Honestly speaking, I didn't know what the intention was. I wanted a university experience. Coming downtown to go to school was a vibe because now I have a reason to leave Brampton and have that experience. I'm sure that was what you were looking for as well. Yeah. It wasn't until like third year of school where I was like, I've been in this program where I'm supposed to know about movement, but like I don't really implement anything that I know. And so like most guys, a lot of times time spent in the gym largely just starts with, at least for myself, just trying to get big.
Yeah.
So it's it's a simple venture. But fortunately, like that kind of got really old. I was interested in like a lot of different like paradigms and frameworks and stuff like that. And so just kind of started going through more of the training route and just trying to learn as well as hopefully make a living or earn a living using that skill set.
Yeah.
And so, kind of focus on that towards my last 2 years of school, and then was in the workplace for 2 years, mostly just focusing on training.
Yeah.
And at the time, I just was like finding myself in spaces that I didn't really feel I personally really resonated with or felt like I was well represented in. And so wanting to kind of take a next step further and try to think of what is my life's work going to look like. Just wanting to take another step further, I applied for Chiro school, and then that kind of sent me into another sort of 4-year journey where I was fortunate enough to meet my first like real mentors.
Yeah. It's so it's cliche to say, but it's cliche for a reason. Like we go to these stages, like I'm in that stage right now where I've just graduated, but it's like, do I even know what I'm supposed to really be doing?
Sure.
That's something I'm trying to figure out right now. And a lot of people are like that, and it's it's refreshing to get that reminder from somebody who has gone through that, and it's like, what, some things just didn't work out, and now I have to change that, find something I actually love to do and have a passion for. Not that I'm necessarily changing careers. I got to start my career first, before I change it.
Yeah.
But, it's cool to hear that, and we're always about, like on the podcast, I always try to learn about that journey. And from where I met you, Brampton Muay Thai, how did you end up there? I always wondered how you met with Nick and Dr. Ashley.
So I knew Nick well before going to school through basketball. And so when I applied for school, it was in and around the time I had just kind of seen through Facebook and stuff like that he had started Brampton Muay Thai and things like that. I remember being in Cairo school in my first year and running into him at the library. And so I was like, oh shit, like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And started chopping it up with him, and it was good to see him. We had recently had like a little bit of discussion about something totally different. So to run into him in person and then kind of have that sort of reintroduction to him in person again was nice. And at the time, when I came into my first year, Ash had just graduated. And so they had just started what was then Brampton Muay Thai and Chiropractic. And he was like, yo, we're going to need some good people over at the clinic. Like, let me know if you're looking to work. And that was big for me at that time in my life because, like, as I said, when you come out of school and you don't feel like you have a career, you're looking for, mentorship, you're looking for guidance, you're looking for some sort of hope that if you work hard, there's going to be something that this amounts to.
Yeah.
And so, again, I was still fairly young. I see this like person that I looked up to and was doing a cool thing from the city that I'm from, and he's telling me that there's going to be an opportunity. And so early on in school, I was like, okay, I'm going to go through school, but be much more intentional with trying to position myself so that once I'm done school, I don't feel like I left another program not having a vision or a career or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it started from there. And I was working for Ash, like working the front desk and stuff like that. That's where I first initially crossed paths with you and your brother. And then at that time, Krunick was still fighting.
Yeah.
And he had asked for guidance on his strength and conditioning, which was kind of like that bag that I was really leaning into. And so it was kind of an amalgamation of different types of opportunities and skill sets kind of coming together at the same time. And like I was in a position with them to obviously just like really gravitating towards them from like just a feeling of familiarity and connection as well as mentorship. And then having the opportunity to like work within my field kind of and implement the skill set that I was trying to harbor at that time as well. So that was the beginning of that whole situation.
Yeah. And I remember many years ago, like, well, my time frame, when I was like in high school.
Many years ago.
Yeah. When I was in high school, I think it was after some sparring session, and you were there, you would spar with us. I remember you talking about like how you transitioned from like being that person who really focuses on gaining size, hypertrophy, as one would call it, in the gym, to like training Muay Thai. And was that through Krunick?
Yeah, so when I was in first year, I got heavy into powerlifting. Even that seems cliche as a chiro, especially in the era that I came up in. But yeah, I did get more into powerlifting. And so I was working with Ash and training Nick for like a year before I even started Muay Thai. And then he was like, yo, like, you've been here with us for like a year and you haven't taken a class with me, like, what the fuck, kind of thing. And then he had asked me to come to a training session that he was doing with one of his puchoys. And mind you, at that time, I'm just lifting and sometimes playing ball. And then he's like, hey, yo, come this time. We're going to go on a 7K run.
Yeah.
7K run.
As a powerlifter.
Yeah, come back. We're going to do like a bunch of skip knees. And we're going to hit the bag. And then he held pads with me. And I just remember like at that time being like, it was almost cathartic. It felt really good to see that, one, I could just do it. And two, to see like a level of curiosity open up where this is something that I'm totally new at. And it seems fun enough that I'm enjoying it. And this is just the first time. And that kind of kicked things off. And so after that year of just kind of doing my own thing and being on the training side, sort of admin side of things, that was when I started to like, really dive in.
Cool. And then how long were you training? Were you training Muay Thai consistently on and off, like after that point, or was it just?
So yeah, I was. There was a running joke because like I didn't really spend much time in class. early on, I just knew that I wasn't spending my time well in class, and so I would try to work more. And so I was in the clinic like at least 5 days a week, and so being there, and also being there before class starts, there's a lot more opportunities for me to train one-on-one. And
Yeah.
so I was able to train fairly consistently one-on-one with crew Nick, and through that just kind of had like a very potent sort of education process when it came to Muay Thai.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting to see the development when it comes to a one-on-one setting, and I think like my personal development within Muay Thai went so much faster once me and my brother were doing those private classes with Crew Nick and Crew Cat later on. And it's I think obviously they're both valuable. One teaches, like the class teaches you a bunch of different other skills you might not be able to develop on your own. But what do you feel is the biggest value of like that one-on-one kind of setting, as you do with, you know, having private sessions with your clients and stuff?
Yeah. I think it's just, it becomes a lot more potent because there's less noise. You know, it's just you. I'm looking, or he was looking only at me, right?
Yeah.
So now the word and like the cueing and the level of direction just becomes a lot sharper because it's not deterred anywhere else. Outside of just managing how you would teach a class, which is something that I started to learn in my own right after opening the space as well and teaching classes. It's not just like the subject matter, but it's like managing the room, you know, and understanding how to manage a room or control the room, as Krunik would say, was something that I became very aware of watching classes from him, watching, you know, Jose teach, watching Jit teach, watching Crew Cat teach, like seeing all of these different people lead a group of people. It's way more than just subject matter, because you're now dealing with like attention spans, different energy levels from people coming in from work or from school, good days, bad days, all of this stuff, right? And so when it comes to a one-on-one setting, all of that just becomes like hyper focused. And now it's like, okay, you're the only person in front of me. And naturally, you end up just having to work harder too because, you know, they're only looking at you. And so, yeah, honestly, I felt like, and I'm sure you felt this way too, but kind of spoiled in a way because it was just so potent, you know?
Yeah.
And fairly consistent.
Yeah, for sure. I remember, I mean, how often you get to go into a class and like your teacher asks you, hey, what do you want to learn today? You know, I remember getting asked that for the first time. And I was like, what? It's like breaking the fourth wall. Because usually you're getting yelled at, like, not yelled at, sternly told to do it because, you know, and it was, especially at that point in my training, because there's a different phases of anything, learning anything, right? In the beginning, the simplicity that you have in the beginning is because of lack of knowledge.
Yep.
And then you get into the depths of focusing on the technique and developing no matter what it is. And then once you come out of that, once you gathered as much knowledge as you can, then you go back to simplicity, but you have the foundation behind it.
Yeah.
And it was at that point where the crew asking me, hey, what do you want to learn today? Like, what do you want? That's when it was like, I know what I want to learn. Because if I was asked like a year or two, whatever, earlier, I would have been like, I don't know. Because at that point, my interest was very dialed in at that point.
Which was?
Just, I remember really.
Oh, you're sharp.
Learn well, you know, I appreciate the compliment. It's something to take a compliment for me, but I remember like clinch was something that I really wanted to develop because it's a more advanced thing within the art of Muay Thai, right? We learn our basics to help us, you know, do better in the ring, be better in terms of our personal development, simplify things for whatever altercation may happen. And clinch was always something that I wanted to dive deeper into because once you're exposed to it, it's, you know, it's like, it feels like its own martial art at one point, or I remember Kru actually mentioning to me when I interviewed him for the weight, he mentioned that at one point it was separate.
Okay.
There was boxing, there was wrestling, then there was a combination, and that's what Muay Thai became. Um, and it makes a lot of sense when you see the depth that is put into the clinch study. Like, I mean, there's whole fighters that just devote their whole style just to that.
Yeah.
And now at this point, having practiced Muay Thai since I was like 11 years old, it's like that's one of my favorite parts about it.
Clinch is very, like, the thing with Muay Thai is that it's very simple. Like, there's not a lot of things to do. Punch, kick, knee, elbow, and then obviously the clinch is like an element that colors largely knees and elbows.
Yeah.
But the simplicity means it goes deep, right? And like the level of nuance and like strategy and technique, it was like it could go on and on. And I remember just being able to talk to Nick about that kind of stuff, that subject matter, and all things kind of movement related in depth, because again, at the time, one, being very impressionable, two, being very curious, it kind of just unearthed like this sort of exchange where like we would just go on riffs on different topics like endlessly. And so it was like a nice breeding ground for me to like, have a lot of autonomy as well as a lot of sort of focused subject matter to learn and sort of like look to understand and refine, so that way it would just kind of shape everything else that I would end up doing.
Yeah, and I think that the whole idea of seeing your way and what you want to do across different things, everyone other paths and stuff, I felt that was really instilled through the practice of Muay Thai and the way that I was taught. Because people, generally Muay Thai is not assumed. It is more focused as a combat sport from the general public's point of view, right? If you're an MMA fan or fan of combat sports. But the way it was taught to me as, being young, I never thought of it as a sport until I discovered like peak fighters, started looking into it. It was always as a martial art first. And I think there's a huge difference in the way it's taught, and this is why the quality of the teaching matters. Like so many other places, not to bash any specific place, right? But teaching something purely for the competitive nature of it, it loses out on, how do you become the best martial artist rather than the best fighter? Because everyone has different reasons why they're there, right? And I remember that Kru always said he didn't want to push us to fight, especially when we were young, right? Because we're very impressionable at that age, and he really didn't want anyone to fight. Basically, he was under 18. I remember, because you're even when you're 18, you might not have the best sense of judgment, but it wasn't necessarily the point, the whole point at least. And that's something I really appreciated, and I still hold in my mind. Like, I still practice it as a martial artist. Like, do I want to fight eventually? Yes, that is something I want to do, but that's like secondary. This is like, you gotta live the way,
Sure.
Have it be your path.
Yeah. And I think too, like, I mean, again, like those years were quite influential on just like my outlook of things. Like, it was like mid-20s, and so like I'm starting to get a little bit older, relatively, I guess. But like I don't feel young anymore, right? And so I'm looking to soak up game, right? And I'm looking for, like I said, like this sense of like hope and ambition, or like a catalyst to the ambition that I had. And so it was a great breeding ground, and it allowed me to kind of be very honest with myself. I think more than anything, martial arts, especially when it comes to sparring, it just forces you to kind of confront who you really are, because it's not who you think you are. It's like, okay, what have you done? What are you now capable of under the circumstances? And so that level of honest confrontation with oneself, I think, was healthy. especially when you're just trying to like kind of figure yourself out, you know.
For sure.
Always figuring myself out, but especially at that time.
Yeah, it's, I've talked about it probably. I mentioned it maybe every podcast, like the value of it, because you don't get that kind of. I mean, you can get it in a lot of different ways, but for me and for yourself, right? It was the sparring that really gave you that kind of stressful environment that forced you to take off any sort of mask that you upheld, and
It's very
it's
ego shattering.
Exactly, definitely shatters your ego.
Yeah.
And also it's also in the context where you're actually safer than an equivalent, like for example, how do you replicate that outside of a gym?
Mhm.
What's like the next stage? You're in a ring, some person confronts you in the street or whatever, right? Like you can't practice that.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the closest you can get to being able to confront who you are and finding out where you really want to improve and what you want to improve on. And if it's done properly, of course, like an instructor who cares about their students' brain health and physical health.
Yeah.
It can be done in such a fruitful and like what's the word? Beneficial way. Like for example, I've been sparring since I was 13 years old. Never had any head injuries, barely any injuries from like I've hit an elbow quite a few times, like maybe like rolled my toe or whatever, but I've never come out like, oh my god, I'm dizzy, or like I don't remember what happened in that sparring session because I get hit in the head so much. Like that's so important because it's the culture of so many gyms, especially when they're focused on the competition. There's so much of the push towards like always going hard, right? And it's a balance, right? You can't go hard all the time, like sure, and even when you do go hard, if you go really hard to the head, you can't condition your brain.
Yeah.
Right. So even when we would go hard at Brampton Muay Thai or wherever, even now where I'm training and stuff, like it's always like, okay, you can go harder to the arm, the body, and the legs, but to the head we're always 50.
Yeah.
Always 50, right? Because you don't need to practice getting full, power crossed in the face, right?
Yeah, I think like that kind of experience is like the product of a lot of things. I think definitely the sort of conductor, the teacher and crew of the situation, or whoever might be leading the session definitely matters. But I think where the individual people are at that time as well also matters. And I think when I think of like when I would watch your come up and stuff like that, just kind of thinking back to those years, you had like a bunch of like good homies to train with, and I remember being like, okay, this is the little crew, and they're just like everyone's kind of got their own little style, but they're all nice with it, and then like everyone's super respectful. So it was just really nice to see among young men who are looking to get after it, and then you're just kind of trying to like keep it chill and like be a normal human being and not some psycho. It could definitely like take over, right? So it's very ego shattering in that sense.
Yeah, especially at that age, because
That's what I
had a major point where I had to switch, right? Because I remember maybe when I started sparring with the adults, like on the sparring days, maybe 14, and at that time there was very few people my age coming there, and when you're at that age, I was like 10 pounds lighter than I am now, which I'm not a very heavy guy in general, right? You have this sort of chip on your shoulder where you're like, I have to move in X way, or I have to maybe go a little harder to just prove myself to these people, right?
Yeah.
I just remember Papa, man. Holy, it was like the end of the sparring session, dead tired, and I remember he just was throwing me around, right? And he was, in retrospect, he was sparing me from, giving me a grown man beating, right?
Sure.
And then I just remember, I'll never forget the point where it hit the ceiling. I remember he hit me with the inside low kick, right, really hard, because I was going hard for no reason. And I was like, okay, next one, I'm gonna bait him. I'm gonna let him hit me in the leg, and then I'm gonna counter with something, right? The problem is I couldn't take the initial hit. I just remember, boom, that leg going out. I never saw white from getting hit in the leg before, but that was the first time. I was like, I think it was just a pure adrenaline rushing to my brain, and then I just fell to the ground. I'm like, I need a second. And then my papa comes, he's like, you don't need to go. Well, why are we going so hard, man? You don't need to go so hard. And I took a break. I went to the washroom. I just looked at myself in the mirror, and then my eyes beat red. Tears just start pouring out of my eyes. And it was like uncontrollable. The first time I've ever had that, like the adrenaline dump, right?
Interesting.
And I remember crew coming up to me, he's like, hey man, are you okay? Do you want to sit down and talk right now? And I remember in that moment being like I couldn't understand what was happening. And I remember crew just sitting there asking me very simple questions, like just see if I was okay and why, this occurred. Obviously, he saw what happened, and that was a major turning point in my martial arts journey. Because after that point, I didn't have that chip on my shoulder anymore, or like I had to prove myself to anyone, even though they weren't giving me that same energy, right?
Right.
Because sometimes people always give you that. They'll give you the energy no matter if you already believe in yourself, right? They're like, man, who is this guy, right? But I don't need to prove it every time.
Yeah.
That's something I really learned from that moment. And I've had to use that mentality quite often, and even recently, where I was confronted in the street by some insane person who was saying a lot of things that I could tell just to aggravate me to fight him. It wasn't really based off what he believed. Sure. I could tell from the stuff he was saying, and I had like a choice to make, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, do I fucking knock this guy out, try to, or do I make this smart choice, and I don't need to prove myself to this loser who shoulder bumped me for no reason and is trying to fight me and calling me all these different racial slurs,
Sure.
And I remember thinking like this guy is not even worth me beating his ass, like it's not even worth it, and walking away after that. And I still every once in a while I think, well, like, man, I should kick that guy's ass. You think he's going to push people around, but majority of my thoughts are like, that because of that experience of having that confidence in yourself, not needing to prove yourself to everyone, gained through that experience in sparring, through martial arts in general, I made the right choice. Like, what if that guy, I don't know, that guy could have pulled a knife out. I was also looking around like, maybe I'm gonna get, this is so random, like what, maybe this guy's trying to jump me or something. 20 guys are gonna jump out of like some alleyway and take all my shit.
Yeah.
Thankfully that didn't happen. But if I didn't have that moment, I think back when I was first sparring, I don't know if I would have that awareness, like in that stressful scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I don't think, ever really worth it. Just because there's so many variables beyond your control. And again, like just going back to like what felt like, a very real, I always consider my experience with the martial artists that I got to learn from Crew Nick to Crew Kat, Crew Ryan, Jit, Jose. I always felt like I had like the realness, that was like the best way of experiencing it. And had it not been for good people, I don't think that I would have learned any of those things. Like I never grew up wanting to do most of the things that I do. But it wasn't that what was like sort of driving me towards trying them. It was like, oh, like I look up to or admire this person, I respect this person, like because of how I view this person, now I care about the subject matter. It was never Muay Thai, boxing, jiu-jitsu, or any of these other things, right? It was just like about the people more than anything.
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate to feel like I had like a very real experience learning these different things, but in a way too that also felt like, again, very wholesome. It was like the community martial artists, when a lot of the subject matter started from teaching that like fighting is a thing to have and not need, rather than to need and not have, but also understanding like, it's kind of like the last resort. you know,
100%.
situational awareness is like your first level of self-defense. You know, running is your first form of self-defense. Because again, it's a lot more sensible that way.
Yeah. And I think as you get older, like, you know, and not to say like I'm some sage over here at 22 years old, but, you know, I've thankfully been able to realize through my martial arts experience and my general experience in life that, like, it's like literally never worth, because your life becomes the perspective I've gained, especially in the last year, is that, you know, when I was younger, like, if I like had lost my life, I wouldn't care. Like, I had gone through something in high school that really changed like my perspective. I was always very timid and didn't want to try things because I didn't want to fail at them. And outside of, you know, within martial art. But then I had something happen where I was like, you know what? I could have been dead this day. I'm gonna move forward and try whatever. And that's why one of the main reasons why I started the podcast.
Yeah.
Just a lot of different things. But now that especially this past year, it's taught me that your life is not just your own. You know, like, there's so many people who are around you. Like, if you were to make some stupid mistake and lose your life, like, how would that affect the people around you?
Oh yeah.
And that's really changing that kind of young, almost selfish mindset of thinking, you know, if I'm dead, like, whatever, you know, like, I won't feel anything anyway after. That really changed my perspective, thinking about it in that way, where, like, do I want to cause this pain to my family who's taking care of me my entire life, my younger brother, you know, my friend? Like, I've seen what the pain of losing a loved one does to people. You know, it's horrible, and it's something that, you know, I wouldn't want to be, just because of my own negligence, you know, be the cause of that as well. Not to say that, yeah, you should be overly careful, but just being more considered in what you do. I think I've kind of reached that balance now a little bit more.
I'm only 22, man.
Well, no, I'm not there yet. I'm trying. I'm on the way.
There you go. There you go. Plug.
Yeah. Oh my God, I do so many. I don't even realize that so many content the podcast, but that's why it's called The Way. You know.
Yeah.
I had some more specific questions related to your practice.
Sure.
When people look at Cairo, there's a lot of misconceptions, tons of them, especially online. You know, people watch all these videos like, oh, it's pseudoscience and nothing actually helps, and it's like putting a band-aid on a large wound or whatever. All these things that people say. What is your perspective on people who may not be as educated on that kind of aspect, what the real benefits are of Cairo in combination with other things?
Yeah. I mean, I can approach this like a number of different ways. I think the easiest way to understand it is that, like, the way that I view it is that it's not necessarily that I am loyal to this discipline of chiropractic or whatever, and I'm some sort of like evangelist for it in a way. Like, to me, it's a vehicle to, number one, connect, number two, help people. Yeah. And so it provides me this opportunity to, again, do that through whatever it is that I'm kind of faced with, or the person in front of me. And so, like, number one, that's kind of like the intention. And so whatever I have, at least within my scope of practice under the discipline, I'll look to implement that to try and help somebody, you know, whether it's like move better, feel better, combination of both, or just like really helping them get after it. And so from the perspective of Cairo, my stance on it has largely changed over the years. Like, I'm in my 7th year of practice now. You know, I was in school for 4 years, being like heavily influenced by like the landscape of the industry at the time. And so I remember being in school, being very aware that there was this push to be very anti what is called subby-based. Subby-based is like a lot of what people will call out chiropractors for being subluxation based, or people who just go in, lie down for 5 minutes and just get adjusted and stuff like that. because I understand and know a bit more of the background and the history and like the reasoning for why that happens, my harshness to that viewpoint softens. And so I just kind of like take what I think is good from it, and then look to implement it into my own style, and then use that to also oppose what the other end of the spectrum looks like. So these more quote unquote movement based people and stuff like that, again, get the goods, take from it and learn the principles that I think are applicable given the situation and context that I'm in, and look to implement that into my own style as well. And so the pseudoscience, I think, comes from some real outlandish claims that are out there, unfortunately, which is not the case. But I think people just really fail to realize that, because the way in which people get disproved is that they say that results are temporary. Well, okay, that's true for most things, right? Okay. So like especially the movement heads will be like, that's not really gonna change pain, increase blood flow, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, if you stop training, then you don't just like get out of pain and then that's it, right?
Yeah.
It's an ongoing like engagement with these things and this sort of like holistic approach to, again, moving better and feeling better at the same time, so my stance on it is like, everyone's fighting about the wrong things and they're missing the point,
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, just as you were speaking, I'm just thinking about, I finally finished the book that Coach Jose recommended on the Warriors Path.
Okay.
And there's a lot of interesting topics in that book, but what he talks about is, of course, maybe the global representation for martial arts. I mean, and that philosophy is being embodied the way you practice it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, take what is useful, discard what is of no use to you, and it's so interesting to see how useful these kind of general statements are. A lot of people, when they hear them, they're like, okay, like, what does that mean though? Like, you're just saying this and you're not really doing anything with it. But if you actually think about it,
mm-hmm.
and you use it in your life, they're so powerful, right? Like,
yep.
You don't even realize how much you're being pushed into a box until you actually take a look at, hear one of these kind of statements and apply it to your current scenario, right? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who maybe at one point were more open in their thinking and how they approach just being a healthier person, being a more physically, not even just physically fit, but just feeling physically better.
Yeah.
Right. But they're pushed into this X, category because of their exposure to people, or going to a certain institution, or they being exposed to certain thinkers who only think in one way.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
It just shows the value of the difference of perspective. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it was such a great environment growing up and training at Brampton Muay Thai. Was I always got that, like, Drew always told me, or he always taught in a different way with different people, and he always explained why. I think that was the biggest thing, because he didn't want us to be pushed into a box, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
everyone at a certain point, once you learn the basics, have their own style.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You talked about our group of people, with me, Buffin, the Wound Squad, as we called them.
Yeah.
Shout out. It was.
Is Ajay same age as you?
I think he's part of a year younger.
But that was part of the squad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Arjun, Ethan, Buffin. Who else was there? Justin.
Ajay got accepted into Cairo school.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy, man. So.
Yeah, and he also fought recently too, which was.
Oh shit, did he?
Yeah.
He's nasty.
Yeah, I remember, like, holy, this guy's got, and he had braids and shit. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
Look like Eddie Abasolo right now. Yeah, that environment was just, I was so lucky to have that, and I think that the way that crew approached that whole sort of adapting style to person,
Mm-hmm.
and the way he explained, because he was firm when he needed to be firm. Like I remember getting like swept and like literally flipping over, and then he screamed at whoever did it to me to like sit down, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't just say sit down and made him sit out the whole time. He's like, hey, the reason why I had to like stop it right there, because once it escalates, sometimes it can go really far, right?
Yep.
Like, ask if I was okay. If you don't, make sure not to go too hard on the sweeps and stuff. It can really hurt somebody if they don't know what they're doing, right? And it's always that balance. And I try to take that as much as I can into my my daily life. And I think that it's such a valuable thing to be exposed to at a young age. And it doesn't mean that you have to have it at a young age for it to be within your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like for yourself, being in that scenario, right? You weren't in like your teens, right? You were in your mid-20s, you said?
Yeah, I think I started at like 23 or 24. Yeah. So like I think I got out of university at 22, 21, 22, and then again like I hadn't started, and then it was like a year after my first year in school where I was like, okay, I'm gonna start doing this now.
Yeah.
So yeah, much later in life, but not void of a lot of like some influential experiences and lessons that definitely I still carry with me today.
And on that, like your journey where you're currently at, how did you get to starting ÜNDA? Philosophy behind it?
So like early on, like it's like a typical thing for young clinicians coming out of school to do, to like kind of showcase their work. You need a website.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I remember it being my name, and just like my skill set and stuff like that. And I never really liked it, honestly, because I don't like that kind of attention, and two, it just felt very egotistical, like, oh, this is donreyjuan.com, like it's kind of,
hey man, it kind of has a good ring to it though.
It sounds nice, like I think the name's unique, of course, but just in terms of like how I felt about it, it's like, my name isn't something that matters more than the work does, right? And so for a long time I kind of just wanted to move away from having my work be attached to just my name, and then just wanting it to kind of live through being called something different, like something of a vision on its own. And so my partner, one of her first, she's in social work, she's amazing, she just finished her master's, she's working at U of T as well, so many like U of T ties and stuff like that. But her first gig in social work was at an Indigenous employment and training center here in the city. There's a place called Mizwebeek, which in Anishinaabe translates to the ripple effect. And I remember when she told me that, I was like, oh, that's fire, right? Like, this is sick. And I just, because like, one, it sounds dope. Two, the visual of it, like, okay, obviously this is an employment and training agency, right? But like, to have it be recognized for a vision or like some sort of symbolism, I really, gravitated towards that. And so just always felt that way about this idea of the ripple effect. And then just kind of randomly thought to myself, like, what's the Latin word for ripple? Had never heard the word ÜNDA before. From like I guess like a design style, whatever perspective, like I liked that it was something, one, I never heard before. I didn't want like fitness and chiropractic to kind of be the main adjunct to whatever it would be called, like ÜNDA chiropractic and fit. Sounds terrible. Right? And so
bad branding.
Yeah, like I just liked the word. I liked that it was like 4 letters, it sounded cool and stuff like that, and it was kind of just something that presented itself to me at a good time, and just kind of started leaning into this idea of the vision, and just trying to have my work speak more so through what it was that I was actually like passionate about, rather than having it be about me as the clinician.
Yeah.
Which again is something that I have a softer stance on now compared to when I first came up with what I wanted to call it and stuff like that. But understandably, people are always going to gravitate to people more than they gravitate to anything else. But having that in place was something really important for what I wanted out of like sort of the next stages of how my career path would kind of evolve.
And that it's interesting.
That's just the name side of things, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting from my perspective as like graduating as like from like a commerce program. We're taught all these different things, right? But what I always saw, especially being in like the marketing focus, was like every brand that is at a local level has that element, and people always feel like, oh, you have to have some sort of real element to your brand, always, right? Even to your company, no matter what you're doing. But a lot of times people just like within business, there's so much, there's a lot of fluff and all this BS talk. But I think that's one of the biggest things I remember because, there's so many different things, so many different businesses that come around, like especially in in a city like this, like a growing city, and being able to differentiate based on who you are, that's long lasting because people focus on the short term so much, and it might be harder in the beginning, right? Focusing on the really people focused, like people first approach, but that's a lot of brands got very successful, right? They started with the people first approach, and they didn't lose it necessarily. They just were able to scale it to a different level. And obviously some brands, once they get to a certain level, they lose it. And that's why you lose that connection, like with the brand. And focusing on the actual brand itself rather than attaching yourself to, rather than making yourself the brand, more like the energy that you bring. Which is, I think, is
values and vision and stuff like that.
Very smart, because it allows. The problem is when it's attached to a person, then it's very fickle, right? Because people's opinion of a person can change so easily. But if it's just about what you do and how you make people feel, then that's something that can be changed and shaped in the future. And people's opinions about you, about this guy, right, don't really matter as much. It's more about what you actually do, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, it's nice to see that, because especially being in a program where all you're thinking was like get the job at X Big Four, right? The Big Four companies, or like all that kind of stuff. It's nice to like, once people who are actually just living day to day, trying to do something that they want to do and are passionate about, they can still succeed. They don't have to necessarily change to that big corporate mindset, depending on what they're doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I by no means have it figured out. Like, I'm in my first year.
Yeah.
Every single day is like, I'm just trying to continue to figure it out. And so if that's how it comes across, beautiful. Like, that is definitely a part of the intention, and I can appreciate that. But my perspective on like what it is that I'm doing, how I envision it, look to like implement it, and then to see whatever ripple effect it then has beyond that, is still like in a stage where, again, I'm still learning, right?
Yeah.
This is how I think or imagine things should be or could be, especially being in a position in my life where I feel like I'm old enough and young enough to kind of know some things and know what I want to do, how I want to do it, and have like a vision for it, but then young enough to still like really try to put my head down and work really, really hard. And that was a large part of the decision to really just like dive all the way in. It was like, once I was done in Brampton, it was like, okay, what now? I had a personal like life timeline in mind, and I was approaching that, and just was kind of at a crossroads where it's like, do I look to reestablish a similar output under the realm of something else, or do I just kind of go all in on this like thing that I've talked about for 9 years, and like having somewhat of an idea for it and then seeing it unfold? It was like, okay, like let's see what we can do, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
it's largely that I'm still largely figuring it out, and I'm just hoping that I am able to be around for when success comes around, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's always like it's funny because I think about like I'm part of I guess we call it a startup with my friends.
Cool.
It's art focused, so basically it was started by two of my close friends from high school. They would go to OCAD, and they basically saw that they weren't able to table anywhere at these kind of artist markets where you can sell your prints and your merchandise and stuff.
Mhm.
And they just kept on seeing the same people over and over again, how it was really closed off network. And they said, you know, screw this, we're gonna do our own event. So they did the first event, and it did really well. For like the planning, it was like 3 weeks. They planned an event. They had like 30 vendors, and
Oh.
300 people came, right? And then later on, they had asked me to join because I was obviously there supporting them because these are my friends, right? They wanted me to join because they're like, we want to really push this, right? Because we think we have something here that a lot of these other markets and other people just aren't focusing on, which is the giving, you know, shining a light in such a dark path, which is art, right? It's such a difficult field to make a living in, and those who are making a consistent living are like, it's based off, a lot of times it's based off of you know, luck and a lot of these things. You want to reduce the amount of luck involved in it and give people a path. So one was making better events and focusing on making them bigger and better, and really making the experience more than just I'm going to place to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
We want it to be a real event and focused on the arts in general. So we don't have any restrictions on art style. The only thing we really focus on is original art, because that's where we want to push that, because that's where the real longevity is within art, because you can't scale fan art of things, right? Which is you know, because you don't own it, right? And from there we started to expand into different areas, like for example, that figurine over there, we made that. We can make a lot of different things, and yeah, it's really cool. Charles is the one he's one of the co-founders. He's really knowledgeable now. He actually went back to China for like three months and just was there on business. Like, he met manufacturers like calling us from the different places and stuff, and it's
the hustle's real.
Yeah, it's really exciting because the market is so young in Canada, but where we see it so robust is in Japan.
Okay.
Where they're like, it's the scale that they have these kind of art markets and things like your Comic-Cons, like your fan expos, is insane. Like, for example, there's one in Tokyo that is 6 times the size of Comic-Con here in Toronto.
Okay.
It's like something that you can't even call, because Comic-Con's like 30,000 people, right?
Yeah.
But that's like, there's 6 floors of the same size there. Mm-hmm. And everything is done so well. Everything done so well. And obviously we're not there at that point yet as a country, right? In the context of Canada, North America, because Japan doesn't really even need to expand, right? They have such a strong domestic market. But what we wanted to do was like, we can do that here. Like, we have the know-how, we can learn from these kind of events and put our own spin on them and really be here at the forefront of this movement, because we see a lot of art markets popping up. People care about these smaller artists more. Like, there's more push, especially with like things like Instagram and TikTok and stuff. Like, people are actually able to make money by going to events and selling stuff. And we want to help people along. So we want to be like, if somebody is just graduating from program and they're like, okay, what do I do now? Like, how do I build my network? How do I grow my following and get connections with manufacturing to actually sell my stuff? We want to be that answer to them, like help them out, and obviously have a piece of it, of course. Like, we're not doing, it's not a charity,
right?
Of course.
Everyone needs to eat.
Yeah, and but we want to be as transparent as possible. Like we don't want to be like a music agency where back in the day, like, yeah, this is a 99% and 1% deal, like where you make no money off your albums. We want to be like, okay, this is how much we're coming in with this is how much work we're doing, this is how much you're expected to do. Like, we want to be completely transparent, because that's the issue that people have with these kind of organizations, right? Now, obviously, we're only a year in, but we've been doing relatively well. Like our last event, we have actually an event this weekend that's coming up, but our last event, like, we got to 2,200 people came.
That's amazing, man.
It was insane. Like, because the first event to the second event was like 1,200 more people came, which was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And even this one, obviously 700 more. It's crazy, and it's that was also with like minimal investment, like all organic, like pushing as much as we can within the community. And that's why I say I value that kind of like really human connection, because that's like, there's so many art markets, but if there's no integrity to what you're offering, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not going to last. Like, we saw something happen recently. I'm not going to delve into it, but there's like an art market here in Toronto that completely fell apart because the organizer has got all these, let's just say, he's got questionable integrity, and all this stuff came out.
I think I heard about this one.
Yeah. And it's like, eventually it's all gonna, you have to have it throughout the entire process. And that doesn't mean like we're holding people's hands throughout the process, right? But we're there to work together. Like, it's us and the artists. Like, it's the Mutual Artist Network is the name of the company, right?
Okay, cool.
And this kind of connection, we want to like be able to do bigger and better things, like brand like collaborations with people, because the money within art is within the merchandise. But we don't want to just like throw it in a t-shirt and be like, okay, because nobody wants that for their own art, right? People do that just because, oh, it looks kind of cool or whatever, but I need to make some money. We want them to be like, this is a considered design. Like, we designed the shirt together. You choose the fabric, you choose the print style. You choose, like, even for like, you make charm, you choose the type of acrylic charm, how thick it is, what are the layers you got, like all that kind of stuff, like a really considered approach. Because right now it's in that stage of like, there's not really any clear way of getting to that point.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I think like just from listening to you talk about like how you guys are differentiating yourselves within like the art market, sort of marketplace in and of itself, I think is really important, because I think it speaks to this like idea of reciprocity, and like, if collaboration is going to be inherently like, one, fruitful, and two, meaningful, I think there needs to be a level of like clear expectations and reciprocity in terms of like effort and exchange. And I think that just even for myself, like, when you think of your life's work and having a career and making a living, like, everybody wants to be rich. Right? Like, I think it's like a universal thing, or at least like to some capacity, like, be comfortable, right? No one wants to struggle, right? Especially if we're gonna like live in the matrix, right? Like, we're playing the game, right? So everyone needs to secure a sense of livelihood. That's a fairly universal desire, but I think the level of integrity and the way in which you go about earning your living, I think, matters a lot, because at the end of the day, like, at least for me, and it seems like for yourself, this is our life's work, right? This is less about a job and more so what we're looking to try and contribute, and hopefully like be able to experience cool things, like make a living and kind of take care of the people we love as well as ourselves at the same time, And so it can be a unique endeavor, definitely not something that comes easy. Doing anything with integrity never comes easy. But like, if being in something lucrative was the only desire, I feel like, being a chiropractor was probably the wrong decision, you know what I mean? And so it's like, life is crazy, man, and I just feel like at this point now, understanding the vehicle that I'm able to drive to try and again connect and help people and look to like build a thing here in the city that hopefully lasts and stands the test of time is a great opportunity. And yeah, it's just like it speaks to more so like the way in which you go about it more than anything.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we should probably wrap it up. It has kind of getting dark and we don't have the extra lighting.
No worries, man.
But
that shit flew by.
I know it's been like probably an hour at this point.
Yeah.
But I thank you so much for coming on. If you want to plug your practice, time.
If you're in the city or in the Leslieville area and you need any help like managing injuries, moving better, or just having fun, like kind of getting after it, just check us out. It's ÜNDA, located in Leslieville.
Hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we will see you guys next week. Remember, never stray from your way.